And now, please let me introduce our first featured guest. He is a priest of the Archdiocese of Miami and has known Monsignor Albacete for many years. So I invite Father Chris Marino as our first participant in today's episode of the Albacete Show.
Well, good afternoon. We're here because at some point in our lives, we were privileged to be called Monsignor's friends. And one of the great things about friendship with Lorenzo was that it was generous. It was generous. Many times I see how we are very possessive of our friendships. We have a particular friend that we like to go out with or talk to, and then all of a sudden we find out that they spoke to someone else, and we get very upset with that, and our jealousy rages. And with Lorenzo, it was never like that. Lorenzo was always happy to share his friends with you. And if you spoke to one of his friends outside of the context of him being there, and he was very happy with that as well, because his idea of friendship was something which had to do with generosity, not with possessiveness. And that's a feature that I think all of us need to follow Lorenzo on in our friendships. Just I think now just watching the Albacete show the other day and seeing some of those faces there, and it reminded me of so many stories along the way of my friendship with Lorenzo and my friendship with those people as well. And many of the people that were on that Albacete show the other day are people whom I have seen along the way. And every time we're together or every time we happen to encounter each other, somehow, Lorenzo comes into it, even though he's not physically in the room with us anymore. And those friendships of those people that I saw on the show yesterday, endure because of the generosity of Lorenzo, because Lorenzo gave them to me, I would say, in a certain sense. And for that, I'm so grateful. Last night, as a matter of fact, after yesterday's show, late at night, as he is wont to do, Cardinal O'Malley, who has been a friend for 30 some odd years, independent of Lorenzo, but the friendship deepened as a result of Lorenzo. And now to the point that Cardinal O'Malley and myself, we remain very good friends because he has lots of family here in Miami. And we are very good friends. But so many of our conversations to this day, somehow they touch on Lorenzo. Something that happens, either he'll call me or I'll send him a message. And last night he called in response to yesterday's event. And he reminded me of so many things. And we spoke about so many things, about so many other friends that we've met because of Lorenzo. And it's just something beautiful because, Olivetta happens to be one of those people. I met Olivetta independent of Lorenzo. However, it was Olivetta that brought me back into friendship with Lorenzo. And, I can't look at Olivetta today without, seeing Lorenzo. He remains very much alive in a real and true way, not just because we believe in the communion of saints, which we do, but also every friendship. So that's my only point in all this, is that friendship needs to be generous, not possessive. And all of us that are on this call right now, all of us had our idea of friendship amplified by the ample presence of Monsignor Lorenzo Albacete. And for that, I say thank you, Lolo. Thank you, Lorenzo.
Thank you, Father Chris. Our next guest is a journalist and a man of many talents. I'm not sure quite what he's doing right now, but Angelo Matera.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. This is really a privilege to be able to share experience of Monsignor like this. Rereading, pretty close with Greg Wolf and knew about the book coming, and with Lisa and John, and got the book a while ago, and to enter, to reread Lorenzo, which I've done periodically, but in concentrated form. I mean, it's been such a blessing for me to recenter myself and my work, because I work in media, I work in marketing, I work in communications, and I obsess about all the things that Lorenzo warned about. I mean, I enter into theory and discourse and so on. And the ideas that Lorenzo's ideas are very valuable, but to read him, you're always brought back to his person, to what he talks about, the event of the encounter with his humanity. And it's been such a blessing. And the main thing I wanted to relate is really my encounter with Lorenzo, which was part of my journey, my conversion to the church in the 90s, through John Paul II, reading a column by Andrew Sullivan on Veritatis Splendor, where it was interesting because so much of understanding Lorenzo, you need to understand paradox. It's all, Jesus is a paradox, the God-man. And Sullivan said he was simultaneously alarmed and attracted by Veritatis Splendor, the idea of absolute truth. And this was what triggered my final movement into the church. And I had a conversion, and I was very much a gung-ho Catholic, and then started to learn more about John Paul and Vatican II and the theology that Lorenzo was immersed in. I didn't know him yet. And I was starting to realize that my world in secular media at Time Inc. and so on, that everything I had experienced before my conversion was for a reason, to then try to communicate the church to that world. And that's been my passion. So anyway, to make the cut to the chase, I became friends with Chris West. And I said, I want to launch a website, which eventually became a website that I ran for about 5 years called God Spy. And he said, we were talking about John Paul, and he said something very bracing. He said, John Paul, which was critical for the project. He said, John Paul would rather you be free and wrong than unfree and right. And he said, and you must meet this man, Lorenzo Albacete. You have to meet him. And I had remembered that his name, that I remembered reading a column in the Sunday Times magazine, and that certainly got my attention. Who is this priest? And it's a serious Catholic writing in this bastion of secular media. And he said, you must call him. So to make a long story short, I called the office of CL when it was at Grand Central Station. I also was involved with a different movement that I was leaving, not because of anything bad, but it wasn't my charism. It wasn't, I had learned since a little about Giussani and the movement and the project of encountering culture. Anyway, he said, sure, come over. Or somebody said, yep, Monsignor will meet with you. And I liken it in many respects, not all, because he was not, he didn't torment me as Luke Skywalker meeting Yoda. You know, it was one of those experiences where we talked for 2 hours. And I mentioned to John, and he wants them. I said, I wrote down immediately when I got home, I wrote down 5 pages of notes of the incredible stories that we talked about, that he told. Many are classic stories. Some I haven't heard elsewhere, but it was a life-changing experience because he represented what I had started to learn, that the church was not, you know, all of the truths of the church were actually a fulfillment of the search for freedom that was driving and still drives secular culture in a distorted way. So this 2-hour meeting was this incredible conversation that was life-changing, and had several more afterwards. I had known Greg Wolf. He came in, we met Lorenzo. I think he hadn't really had a long meeting with Lorenzo, and some other friends as well. But just, you know, the stories, the incredible stories that really, you know, what are these stories? You know, are they just stories? Are they gimmicks? Of course, you know, they're not. They represent the fact that not only can you be human and be a disciple of Christ, you're even more human, you're even more free. And it reminded me of an adage from, I had also come to know the people at Communio. Adrian Walker said, Catholics are interested in everything and afraid of nothing. And you know, this was just the final culmination of this experience. And again, like Jesus, you know, in the gospel, come and be with me. I mean, Lorenzo has, you know, embodies that, as we all know. But for me, he perfectly embodied the paradox of someone, you know, so many different paradoxes. The fact that he was a human, that these are concrete stories, you know, talking about being able to just go out and get a pizza and read a novel and be a Christian, you know, just all of the, you know, all of those concrete instances that Lorenzo always talks about, and many other funny stories, but yet it has profound implications theologically. So, you know, it's not about the theology, it's not about discourse. However, it doesn't deny that. It captures reality on such a complex level. So I just wanted one last story he meant that stuck me. I haven't seen anything else. He talked about the fact that when he met with, you know, regularly with friends at the New York Times, and one instance with Arthur Sulzberger, the publisher, and he recounted how Sulzberger said to him, "Monsignor, we know a lot of priests. They tell us what we already know. You tell us what we don't know." And I think that's just one particular story that I haven't heard elsewhere, that, you know, not that that's the goal, but he represents bringing, you know, he always represented shattering through ideology and conformity and just tired ideas into something new that, you know, we need today. And this is something that, you know, not to turn Lorenzo into a project, but the world needs who he is and still is, and as he is with us today. So he totally changed my life. So that's all I can say.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Our next speaker is someone who has known Lorenzo probably longer than most of us, since he was 17 years old, and interestingly enough, has a connection to another one of Lorenzo's friends who would become Pope John Paul II. But I'd like to invite JAKUB Griegel to share with us his experience of friendship with Lorenzo.
Thanks. I thought that you were going to say I have a connection to another person, which is Olivetta.
Wow.
I actually know Olivetta longer than I knew Lorenzo. Yeah, no, I think Olivetta knows me since I was, 10, 12 or something like that.
Yeah, I think you were like 12 probably.
Yeah, good old days when I was young and white hair. Yeah.
83, so.
Yeah, no, so I met Lorenzo, I think in 80, probably 6, 7 or something like that. Look, I mean, I put it in my background. Those are my college years right there. It's me and Father Lorenzo drinking beer. I've known him since, I was 16 or 17 when I was growing up in Rome, and he was teaching at John Paul II Institute, where my dad was teaching also. And essentially I was his parking attendant. You know, he needed to go somewhere to buy a pen, and I would be sitting in the car, you know, triple parked in Rome while he was buying the pens. That was my job, and that's how I got to know him. And from then on, you know, I've known him since he died, until he died. And look, I mean, it's very hard to describe Father Lorenzo for those of you who have not met it, because the stories are just wild, and you know, and they don't convey exactly, you know, the depth of him. I saw Father Lorenzo in Rome. I saw him in Paris. I was, you know, house sitting. I was helping with a parish in Paris, and he decided to come for one night to visit me. And we ended up at a Cuban restaurant where he started, you know, screaming against Castro and singing Cuba Libre. He picked me up at the Reagan Airport, DCA, when I arrived for my freshman year to the university. He picked me up at the airport and dropped me in my dorm, and then picked me up again because I had to buy bed sheets. Can you imagine Father Lorenzo walking, I think it was a Macy's or something like that, buying twin-size bed sheets, right, with me. You know, neither of us had any idea what we were doing. Actually, I ended up without pillow cases, I guess, and he ended up giving me one of his, which had holes from his cigarettes. So I spent my freshman year with pillowcases from Father Lorenzo with holes from cigarette ashes. You know, these days, you know, you probably have some strange ideas of what was going on between us and giving the different accusations and different stories. You know, it was wild. But he actually took me on my second trip to the US. I was coming to DC to see some friends, to stay with them, to learn English. I didn't speak a word. And he decided, no, forget it. You have to come to LA with me because you spend too much time near the Vatican. And he took me to LA, and the first thing we did in LA wasn't to visit a church, was to see the Miami Vice show at the Universal Studios. Right, so that's the wild, and I can go on, right? And none of that, however, conveys just the depth of the discussions and an enormous friendship. And let me just mention two things. One is actually following on what the first speaker, I think it was Father Marino, said on the generosity of friendship. One of the things that, and I would drive many days with him when I was in DC for my undergraduate studies. We would go from visiting his mother almost every day. She would have Alzheimer's near in the his nursing home of the Little Sisters of the Poor near Catholic U, and then pick up actually Father O'Malley. I remember picking him up. He has no idea who I am, but we picked him up and then went to some fried chicken joint. But the spectrum of people that you would meet with him over the course of 2 hours, 3 hours of an evening, right? You would meet some wealthy guy in DC, you would meet a bishop, you would meet a sisters, the Little Sisters of the Poor. He would end up talking, half hour at some homeless guy at the intersection, and pull out $20 that he couldn't find for the life of him in his pocket, right? And just give it to him. And then of course he had no money to pay for anything else after that. And he would have actually in-depth conversation with all of these people. Somehow, he found something in common with all of them. I remember once asking him something on the nature, like, what is going on here, right? And he said, there's absolutely no difference among all of us. And his point that we talked many times about this is, we all have the big question. And of course, so in the Latin, the magna quaestio, that St. Augustine mentions in the Confession, all of us have it. All of us have it. We just have to figure it out and figure out what particular permutation of that magna quaestio, the big question mark, each one of us has, and how to help each one of us to ask that question. So I guess the generosity of friendship, in the way that Father Moreno reported, or just the spectrum of people that you end up meeting with him and with whom he was a friend. The second quick thing that I would just mention is, obviously he was incredibly well-read, erudite, very deep, both, I guess, theologically, philosophically, however you want to put it. But it was all personal for him. And I don't mean personal as in, in a good way. For him, you mattered. And the friendship, the particular friendship mattered. And the way it's still shocking to me. He celebrated my wedding. Often, I would tell him that he married me, and he would get furious when I said that. He said, no, I don't marry you. You're marrying your wife. I just celebrated the wedding. But at the wedding, I think Olivetta, you may have been there too. I was, now it's time for the vows, and he tells me the vow. I repeat them. I, JAKUB, take you, Priya, to be my wife. He stopped. He stopped me, like in front of the whole church. He said, stop. There's a moment of panic there. Any marriage is a mystery, and in many ways. And it's like, what's going on? My parents are there. My future in-laws are there. Friends are there. He stops and he said, no. Moment of silence in the church. And he said, stop looking at me. Stop looking at me. You're not married to me. Look at your wife. I was like, Hey, we started again, the vows. And then, okay, now it's fine. Now you're looking at your wife, not me. The point I think he meant beyond just a show is, I'm marrying her, not just some sort of idea, yes, the sacrament, absolutely, but I'm marrying her. And he wanted me to take it personally on that spot, beyond the fact that he mentioned something that, it was already in the period where all the scandals were coming out from the sexual harassment problems in the church. And he said, these days I get nervous when somebody looks at me that wants to marry me. But his point was it's like, yes, it's her that you're marrying, and you have to go and spend the rest of your life with her, with Priya, with your wife, not with just an idea of marriage or the sacrament of marriage, which is there, but it's not just a theoretical point, it's that particular person. So that's what I meant by everything was personal with him, right? That it wasn't just a theoretical idea or an abstraction. It was right there in the body, in carne e ossa, as he would always say. In Italian is what it, and how would you translate in carne e ossa, in the bones and in the body of the person. So the personality, I guess, of the experience for him. I'll end it at that because I can continue and put up more pictures, which are probably more embarrassing to both of us.
No, Jakub, thank you very much. And I will tell you, I have been to all of the sessions for this thing, and you're the first person who has mentioned that Lorenzo drove him around instead of always getting a ride from Lorenzo. So you have a unique distinction. THERESA Famolaro, our next guest, is from Washington, D.C., a member of so many, but more importantly, she is someone who's known him since San Francisco. So we'll let her begin with her story there.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, great. I don't know if I can follow Jakub because that was pretty amazing, but I'll start by talking about when I met Monsignor in 1996. He came to San Francisco and I knew he was coming. And I had been in the movement since 1987, but this was like, I had just finished 1 year of what they call like the first year of Memoris Domini, where you're learning about the vocation. And so I was, still very green, and I was used to having people of the movement, the big people come to the United States and give their spiel, right? So, and it was always this big deal, and they were bigger than life or whatever. And so he showed up and just like walked in the door. I cannot even describe it. Walked in the door of, it was at University of San Francisco, this Jesuit university in San Francisco. And it was all the, if you can believe it, all the Catholic conservatives of San Francisco were there. Anybody that was a Catholic conservative was there. And so, he goes in and he just, immediately I fell in love with him because I shook his hand and he really wanted to know me immediately. It wasn't like, I'm the movement, he was just right there and shook my hand and, then he, of course, he was introduced by the head of what they called the Institute at that time, which was this very, very conservative religious institute at the University of San Francisco. And they made him seem like, he was this wonder. He headed up the JP2 and he just broke the mold, and he broke my mold. And anyways, he told a lot of very funny stories, including the fact that the president of the United States introduced him as the Queen of the Americas, because he used to be the queen, the parish, he was a parish priest at the Queen of the Americas parish, but the president, Clinton, I think it was, got his name wrong. So anyways, there was a what you call a dinner afterwards, a reception afterwards. And then, of course, we all had a great time. It was amazing. We got to know Monsignor. And then the next day I get a call from a friend. I think it might've been Anne-Marie Bassett or or Habashi girl. One of the girls called me and said, hey, Monsignor's going on a limousine. And he's got a limousine and we're going to go around San Francisco in a limousine. And of course I'm working, and I had only been at my job for a year. So I was like, so I just told them, I said, I need to go. I have a friend that's got a limousine and we're going to go around the city. And so I literally took off, and there was a small group of us I went downtown, we went to his hotel, and we got this limousine and we drove all around the city. And then we drove to Sea Cliff Restaurant, which is like a beautiful, it's like gorgeous. It's on the Pacific side of San Francisco. And he paid for our lunch. And you could see like it was just over the top extravagant. And at one point I was so in love with him. This is literally, you have to see this is 24 hours. I was just like, he just broke the mold in me. And I had earlier that year taken pictures on the beach right next to San Francisco. And there were these 3 guys I took these pictures of. And one of them, they all worked at Seacliff Restaurant, and one of them I remember was the pastry chef. So I literally asked the waiter, can the pastry chef come over so he could meet Monsignor Albacete? Okay, I was in my early 30s. I was just so impassioned by this guy. And then afterwards, he would regularly come to San Francisco, and we arranged like him to speak at Barnes and Noble and, all these bookstores. And, he loved coming out. He loved coming to California. And we did a lot of very extravagant and fun things. And, later on, I mean, there are many funny stories. He came down here. I would drive him around here in DC. I drove him in San Francisco. I drove him around. And but what is more, as I started to know his deepness, the depth of what he was speaking about, I have to say that he drew you in because he was so much fun. And then he got you, then you were like, okay, I can't mess around. So I'll just name some funny things, like, going to confession to him, or he would say at our retreats, at our members retreats, he'd be like, do whatever you want, because if it's not good for you, Jesus is going to take it away from you. I mean, there's just like, and I was like, he's right. So then you're like more free, you're more extravagant, you're more out of control, and that was amazing. And then he would say things like, on our retreats, he would say things like, there's, what do you want? Sometimes I just want the pizza. There's the beatific vision. Okay. I just want to have a pizza. Limbo seems good. Limbo seems great. Let's just stay in limbo. Why do I have to go to the beatific vision? And I totally got it. But then he would bring you on that journey so that you would want that beatific vision. I just have to say, like, things like that, that he would do. And, then I'll just end with this. There's so many stories I have, but I'll end with this one part when he was dying. So at one point he started not to do our retreats because he was starting to get sick, and it was hard. He had his brother Manuel, and it was really, really hard. And I tried to, not just me, I know, like Olivette, a lot of people really tried to help with Manuel and everything. And I remember one time I went to Puerto Rico and we saw where Monsignor lived because of Yvette, Yvette, his high school friend that he was such good friends with. We saw where he lived, where he went to school, where he was the altar boy. I mean, where he got ordained, it was just like an Albacete tour by his high school friend. And I made a little booklet for him of pictures, and I gave it to him and the retreat. And then he came the next day and he said, you saved my night because of his brother. His brother was so happy to see all those pictures from Puerto Rico. But you can imagine, like, all night, he was always all night with his brother, so he would be with us during the day and then have to go home at night and cook for his brother and stay up with his brother. So it got to be too much. But, and then I can say just a little bit about when he was dying. I remember I think it was from Camille, that Monsignor was dying. I called Olivetta immediately, and she's like, Teresa, he's going to die in a few hours. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to die in a few hours. I'm still going. And Camille's like, Teresa, take the train. I'm like, okay. So I'm going to get on the train so that way I'll bypass traffic. And then Steven Sanchez here and Camille, they came to pick me up, and we went to go see Monsignor. And of course, there were lots of people there around, and Michelle Ricochete coming from the West Coast. I mean, it was just, a lot of people there. And what struck me even there with Monsignor was the reality. He still had his iPad floating around. He still had his phone floating around. He still had some trashy novel that probably Olivetta brought from his home to be at the bed so that he could read. He was still completely there. And he was also too, like, when he wasn't feeling well, like at one point, he wasn't feeling well, and he started to say these Hail Marys, and then everybody around the room was saying Hail Marys with him. I mean, he was terrified, but so it was like, he was real. Like, this was not some pious guy. And that's what just broke my mold, broke everything I thought about what a memorist vocation should be, what a consecrated vocation would be, what any vocation could be. Just completely broke the mold. And since then, I have to say one last thing. It's just a dream, but I've had two dreams since Monsignor died. And I just want to say one of the dreams, because I think it's for all of us. At one point, I had this dream. We were somewhere, I don't know, the community was together, and Monsignor came down, and I didn't want to talk to Monsignor because I just had been to the ER and it was just too much. I just didn't have the energy. But he came and he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, Teresa, and he had come down from heaven to visit us. And he said, Teresa, it's great. It's great. And that to me is like Monsignor made it, and I know he's there. So I just wanted that's it. I'll let the next person go. So.
Thank you, Teresa. Our last but not least guest today is a great friend of Monsignor's, and someone who I always love talking about Lorenzo with, because I feel like you just really got him and loved him, and so thank you for being here, and I invite you to share your experience with Lorenzo.
Thank you. So I was there, Teresa, with you that day, and I remember you saying, "You're going to go to the house of the Father," and I said, "No." I told him, "No, Monsignor, I want you to stay here with me. I don't want you to go. Okay, he can get you another time. I need you." And I said, "What am I going to do? I'm not be able. I have to clean everything up when I tell stories about you." And he said they had to do that for St. Francis, so you can do it for me. I still can't believe we're talking about Monsignor in the past tense. Let's put it that way, okay? It's almost, he would be horrified by all of this, first of all, I think. But one thing I've just seen, I could say anything. I could just be sitting here doing an hour of the stuff we talked about. But one thing I realized is when you started off, Father Marino was talking about how he had so many friends and all of these things, but you know, it's amazing because I always felt like I was his only friend at some points. There was a cast of characters, definitely. He talked about everyone. But I haven't heard most, I don't know who any of you are, basically. And you've known him way longer than I knew him. But there were names that were said and all that, you know. I mean, he wasn't always precise with details. That's why his stories would always change. I would always say, you know, so-and-so told me this story. That's not what you told me. He says, well, you know, you have to amend it. It depends. I need to put other things in there. So I knew him when I was in the seminary, which I did not make out. I did not make the seminary as a priest because he did absolutely nothing to help me. But we had heard about him. He was coming. It was my second year. And they said a Puerto Rican priest was coming. And most of the Puerto Rican priests we had were very conservative, very buttoned down. But someone told me I hear this Lorenzo Albacete is a character. All right. We had to buy this book by some Italian Monsignor, Giussani something. I never heard of it. The title didn't make any sense. When we went into that room, I had never expected anything. I mean, I would never have expected what I got at that point. And then what I got for the next, I don't know, 20 years after that. So he did this routine where he told his life story and everything. And it was just the funniest thing I ever heard in my life. And that's the thing. He was probably the funniest human being I ever met by far. And one of the only people who I can tell his stories and the things that he said and get a huge laugh to people who never met him. So much so that my dad, who's now 90, will always say to me, I wonder what Monsignor would think of this. He only met him once. So much so that a friend of mine, who's much younger than me, is in love with him. I met him after Monsignor died, you know. So part of that is because if I'm saying anything Monsignor was saying to me, I'm trying to remind myself of what we did and what we talked about. So when I got to know him, I did actually get to spend a lot of time with him. Now, when I hear how other people knew him, and at one point I said to him, you know, there were 100 guys in the seminary. Why me? You know, and he said, well, I have tracked the reprobates. He said, so that's why you're the only one here. And then we were in Italy once for Rimini or something, and there was some of these kids. They asked, why did you become friends with Lewis, meaning me, because I had spoken about something. And he said, I looked at him and I looked into his eyes and I saw that he was wicked. And therefore I knew he had a chance to be saved. So, but he, for being as funny as he was, and there were many times where I don't know how many people got how funny he was, really, because he would talk and I would be the only one laughing. I mean, he would reference things, he would reference so many levels of something that I would just be screaming laughing, and most people didn't know what he was talking about, because he wouldn't explain it. He would just do it. I mean, when he was dying, you could have walked in there and it looked like he looked like this. He was losing his mind, but Olivetta and I were talking, and Olivetta's like, this is what he was always like. There wasn't anything different. And in fact, when he was saying those Hail Marys, I was there. I'm like, I don't think I've ever heard him pray, But he was pious. He believed in it. He believed in all of it, because he used to say, look at me. He was big. He said, I can't give my life for a theory. He said, I mean, but he hook, line, and sinker, all of it. He said he wanted to do a Tridentine Latin Mass so he could wear a maniple just for the sake of wearing a maniple. I mean, he loved all of that stuff, but I mean, attached to this, I mean, fun, but funny, but just profoundly funny, in a way that my brain can't work. No one else's brain can work that way, but he would, I mean, if you ever went to a stationery store with him, it was obscene. Okay. I mean, obscene. So, I mean, just the noises he made. I mean, he would put his hand in a bin of pens and take out 100. And one year for the midterm, we just gave him a pen, and he passed us. He passed us all. He wrote. My exams, I wouldn't write a lot and everything. Yeah, you get it, and he'd give me an A. I don't even think he read any of them, but but we would be in a bookstore. This is what it was like with him. We would be in a bookstore, and I was in the middle of something. There was some professor who was tormenting me or something, and he would grab a book. He would point at a book, and it was probably, I don't even remember what it was, because he bought garbage and he read garbage. And he said, they can't get you here. I remember him saying, he says, this is the one place no one can get you with a book. So I've never seen it in any other person, had this ability to have this incredible intellect with this amazing personality who had all of these friends. And yet I'm sure all of us can say we felt like we were his only friend. And also for me, he was, he knew the Pope, John Paul. He told me the stories about him, the things he would say to him and make him, like he said, spill spaghetti on his cassock at the lunches. He told me, he knew Ratzinger, who became Benedict. His phone would ring in the middle of class. Oh, it's the sacred secretary. He would stop and be talking to Cardinal Ratzinger. So the whole world opened up to this Monsignor who lived in Yonkers, basically, but he opened the whole world. I didn't go anywhere with him. We didn't try. We were in Italy a bit, but the whole world was there, So while you went to Kmart, because that's all we did, really. We went to the racetrack diner in Yonkers. I'd have I would be banging the table and cursing and why, and he'd be there. You could smoke in a restaurant at that time. He'd be there with a cigarette. He'd say, yes, well, as Cardinal Baum told me, this still doesn't mean you can't get upgraded to first class on TWA. So I mean, that was the level of things. One of the best things he ever said to me, and maybe this could put him in context, because he's this big personality who seemed like he was a superstar, yet could be amazingly personal. And I'm glad one of the things about him, and I'm not sure if that film showed it enough, was he could talk to the homeless guy. He had the women at his parish at St. Mary's. I mean, these were not scholars. Okay. They were not going to be talking about the incarnation, but he could talk to them as the exact same way, whether he was talking to the Pope. So that level that was there, but he once told me, we were in the refectory, which is the cafeteria, and he used to do the San Juan Bautista masses in Central Park when they would have the Puerto Rican Day. I don't think they do those anymore. And he was the celebrant. And so he had just finished one of them. And he said, listen, he says, I could get up and do my act in front of 10,000 Puerto Ricans. But when I come back here, the hardest thing in the world is to walk across this cafeteria with my tray, because it's being myself. So, you know, first of all, no one talked like that. Second of all, a priest, one of your professors, did never talk like that. You know, as he would go and he would sit by himself and he'd say, I'm going to sit in splendid isolation, like Pius XII, you know, but I would go and sit with him. I was the only one who would go and sit with him because I had never seen anything like it. So I actually don't know what else to say beyond that. There's no doubt that I remained Catholic and probably still do because of him.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you. I don't know how much more there is that you could add. It's been beautiful for me to see over the course of these days the stories that are shared, the commonalities and the differences. But I think that you say it very well when you say that when you were with Monsignor, you felt like you were his only friend, or he made you feel as if you were that important. And somewhat, you know, I'll end our session and thank everyone's participation with this little anecdote. Someone sent me today a picture of one of Lorenzo's appearances in the Charlie Rose show, and in the comments, there's someone who comments twice, and she says at the end of this, in this comment, is just this very brief comment: I cleaned his house in Yonkers, the one on McLean Avenue. He was a nice man. It didn't matter if you were the Pope of the Universal Church, Castro, or the cleaning lady at his house, right? The encounter with Lorenzo made you feel like you had met someone special. There are just a few announcements that I want to say before everyone leaves, but first and foremost, I want to thank our guests for sharing their experience with Lorenzo.